Today we're unboxing a brand new iPhone 6s that's been sealed in its box for 10 years. This model was announced exactly 10 years ago today on September 9th, 2015. And with the iPhone 17 announcement taking place today, I thought it would be really cool to unbox this model from 10 years ago. Taking a look around the box here, you'll see that it has the original shrink wrap from the factory still applied. And also this is in the rose gold color option that was new for this model. Here on the back, we can see that this is the top-end storage configuration with 128 gigabytes. Also, I checked the serial number for this first to make sure that it has never been activated. And I also found out that this was a pretty early model to be produced in September of 2015. So it should definitely be running a very early version of its original software, iOS 9. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and cut the seal. And there we go, the very first time this iPhone has been seen in nearly 10 years. So I'll lift it up here with this pull tab, and there we go. Wow, this is looking incredible in the rose gold color. So first off, let's get this plastic film removed. And there we go, the iPhone is looking absolutely flawless. Now for the moment of truth, let's see if the battery on this iPhone will accept a charge. And okay, it sadly appears that this iPhone is in a boot loop. So I definitely knew that was a possibility, as batteries often go bad when sitting in a box unused for a prolonged period of time. I did purchase a replacement battery for this iPhone though, so I'll be able to get that installed and we can use the device. First though, let's take a look at the accessories that were included with this iPhone. And 10 years ago, Apple was really generous with their included accessories, so not only did you get a charging cable, you also received a power adapter and wired earbuds. These featured a remote and mic, and they came with this really convenient plastic carrying case. And let's see what came with this literature packet. So a pretty basic quick start guide, as well as some regulatory info and 2 Apple stickers. So here's the replacement battery that I purchased for this iPhone. It's an authentic Apple battery that's been pulled from another device, and according to this sticker, it has 84% health. I paid around $12 for this on eBay, and it did include the adhesive strips. And this really isn't too hard of a repair to get done. You need a pentalobe screwdriver as well as a Phillips screwdriver and some tools to pry open the display. You also need a pretty strong suction cup, so I use this one here that's attached to a mirror. So we'll go ahead and get started by removing the pentalobe screw on each side of the lightning connector. So I just attached my suction cup here, and the mirror here kind of gives me leverage to pull open the display. It's a little bit difficult here on the 6S because these were the first models to have these screens adhered down. Thankfully that adhesive isn't very strong, but you basically just have to simultaneously pry with the suction cup and use the little tool here. And really without too much effort, you're able to drive a wedge in between the display and the body. So after just working with that a little bit, you will eventually get the display free. Then I'll just use this Phillips head screwdriver to remove the battery connector bracket. And you can kind of just pull that connector up with your fingernail. Next up, we need to remove the display bracket and cable so we can have better access to the battery. So only 3 connectors there, and the display is now free. Apple gives you 2 pull tabs to remove the battery, but I'm going to remove the Taptic engine here to get better access to those. This actually doesn't have a dedicated connector, it is just simply powered by sitting on these contacts. But now that we've got that out of the way, we can pull on these little tabs to release the battery. So the key to removing these is keeping the angle of them really low. If you've ever repaired an iPhone before, you know how often these strips like to break. And if they do break, it is a real pain to remove the battery. So there we go, I've successfully removed the first strip in one piece. And there we go, the original battery has been removed. This one has a production date of September 2015. So now I will get the new battery installed. I'm going to wait to apply this adhesive just until I confirm that everything is working. Okay, well, bad news. I just realized that the seller sent me a battery from an iPhone 7 instead of a 6S. And because the logic board for the iPhone 7 is different, the connector here will not line up. That's really upsetting. I did go back to make sure that I purchased one for a 6S. So this was definitely the eBay seller's mistake, but I do have a backup plan. So I have another iPhone 6s here in my collection with a good battery. So I'll just pull the battery from this one to use in our rose gold model. Okay, well everything is now put together, so let's go ahead and close it up and power up this iPhone for the first time. And there we go, we've booted right into the iOS 9 setup screen. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm really anxious to see if this device has the activation error. Okay, well sadly it looks like the activation server gods are not on my side today with this 6S. So I am getting the infamous error here, and no matter how many times you press try again, it comes up with the exact same result. Reading in closer to this error here, you can see that it is instructing us to restore the device and install the latest version of iOS. And if you haven't heard of this error before, it's something that only affects the A9 iPhones running iOS 9. Apparently this stems from something that happened in early 2018 that's often referred to as a downgrade party. So basically that was a change that was mistakenly made with Apple servers to allow for the signing of older iOS versions. But when Apple was fixing that and going back to only allowing the newest iOS version to be signed, something in these servers that connects to these A9 powered iPhones was not fixed correctly. So this is the result of that whole situation that we have to deal with. So what I'm going to do to somewhat get around this is basically just bypass this whole setup process. And for that, I'm following a guide that I found on Reddit. This does require use of the Legacy iOS Kit tool. And by the way, it does show the same activation error on a computer. But anyway, to get started, you just drag the restore.sh file from Legacy iOS Kit into your terminal. I'm kind of just covering up some of the sensitive info here, but you go down to Useful Utilities, and then you go down to SSH RAM Disk. And that goes through a whole process that takes a few minutes to load. It will eventually send your device into recovery mode, and after that you have to put the device into DFU mode. So you do that by holding the side and home button for 8 seconds, and once that's up you just continue holding only the home button. You'll see some text scrolling on the iPhone screen, then you just copy this command from the Reddit website. I'll leave this linked in the description if you want to check it out. So after you paste that in, just press enter. And then you just select Reboot Device. After you select Reboot Device, it will start up again in recovery mode. But just go into Legacy iOS Kit one more time and use the Exit Recovery Mode function. And if all goes well, we should boot right into the lock screen. And perfect, there we go. So let's go ahead and slide to unlock. So yeah, all this does is bypass the setup, so the device is technically still not activated. When connected to a computer, you will still get the activation error. There are a few drawbacks to using this process of deleting setup. So for one, you are not able to sync content to the device using Finder or iTunes. And of course, because it isn't activated, you cannot use anything to do with cellular. Also in my experience when bypassing setup, sometimes you are able to log into the App Store, but also sometimes it will give you an error. So let's see if this one is going to work. Okay, well sadly it looks like this one is giving us an error. But anyway, at the bare minimum, we are now able to access the operating system. So let's go into settings to find out which version of iOS 9 we have. And okay, we find 9.0.1. So that's incredible to have just the first revision of iOS 9 after 9.0. We also get confirmation of the 128GB capacity. So now that we've got the battery replacement and the activation error out of the way, let's talk about the history of the iPhone 6s. So this model was announced exactly 10 years ago today on September 9th, 2015. And it was available for purchase alongside the iPhone 6s Plus on September 25th. On the surface, those models appeared to be a pretty typical S model upgrade, as they look nearly identical to their predecessors, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. But I think the iPhone 6s was one of the best S models ever created. So we all know that one of the biggest controversies of the iPhone 6 was bendgate. And that's the controversy where these models could easily be bent during normal usage. So the iPhone 6s models featured an updated design to address that. They were using a much stronger 7000 series aluminum. It made the body 0.2 millimeters thicker than the iPhone 6. So the 6S was 7.1 millimeters compared to 6.9. And the 6S was also slightly heavier, 11% to be exact. at 143 grams instead of 129. And I guess that new design can't really count as a feature, as bend gate on the iPhone 6 really should not have happened in the first place. The 6S could still be bent if you tried really hard to do so, but unlike the iPhone 6 models, it wasn't something that was going to happen anymore with normal usage. Also regarding the design, there was this new rose gold color. This shade was very trendy at the time, and it joined the other colors with space gray, gold, and silver. There was also a little S badge on the 6S to indicate the newer model, and there was also reduced FCC labeling compared to the 6. The 6S also got a huge jump in power, so it was using the new A9 chip. It was 70% faster than the A8 CPU found in the iPhone 6, and it had 90% faster graphics. So that was just an insane year-over-year leap. It also doubled the included RAM amount from 1GB to 2GB. And the fantastic performance from the A9 chip is one of the things that made this iPhone so legendary. It ended up receiving major software support through iOS 15 in 2021. And that version has received some pretty recent security updates, so if you have one of those on that version, it is still quite usable. There was also a really cool new feature on this device called 3D Touch. And that was a pressure-sensitive layer in the display that allowed you to do some really neat things in the UI. So pressing on an application icon with extra force would give you some different options. And this was just so cool, it really added an extra layer of complexity to the software. One of my favorite features with this was 3D touching on the side of this display to access multitasking. And you could 3D touch anywhere on the keyboard to kind of turn it into a trackpad. This was really convenient for moving your cursor around and making precise changes to the text. There was also something with 3D touch called peek and pop. So we'll take a few photos here to demonstrate that. And going into the Photos app, we'll be able to take a look. So pressing with a moderate amount of force would allow you to peek at the content, and applying even more force would pop you into it. And with 3D Touch also came live photos. And those would show you what was happening a few seconds before and after a photo was taken. So I'll try and demonstrate that now by taking a photo of this box. And as you can see, it kind of makes a small little video. And it also includes audio. So this was just a really cool feature. It's something we still have today. And along with live photos came live wallpapers. So we'll check those out here in settings. There are 6 images here of betta fish which were featured on the boxes for the device. So this orange one here, as you can see, was used for the rose gold model. And as you apply force, of course, they animate. This option here was used for the silver model. This was for the gold, and this was for the space gray. There were also 2 extra choices here that were not featured on the box for any device, as they only came in those 4 colors. This one here probably has the most movement of any of them. There were also 3 extra choices here at the bottom. These kind of resembled like clouds of smoke. The 3D Touch feature worked in conjunction with something new called a Taptic Engine. And that was an all-new version of the vibration motor that could provide very precise vibrations. So you would feel a very small haptic feedback when using the 3D Touch features. Sadly, 3D Touch would not live on. It ended up getting removed with the iPhone XR in 2018. And in 2019, it was removed from the iPhone 11 lineup altogether. It was replaced with haptic touch, which brought back most of the functionality just with a software-based long press. But that just wasn't quite the same. I really miss how intuitive 3D Touch was. Sadly though, it only really seemed intuitive to those who knew how to use it. And for the average iPhone user, it just wasn't something that they would utilize every day. However, the live photo feature did really take off. I think that one did resonate with most customers. And speaking of photos, the iPhone 6S got a huge upgrade to the camera system. So the rear lens was now 12 megapixels up from 8 on the previous model. So that was a really significant gain in quality. And it also made for 4K video recording at 30 frames per second. The front-facing camera got a great improvement too. It was now 5 megapixels instead of 1.2. And when taking front-facing photos, there was now something called a retina flash. So that would basically just turn the whole screen into a flash. The 6S here also got a huge upgrade to the Touch ID sensor. So it was now a 2nd generation model that was way faster. And to demonstrate that, I'll go ahead and register my fingerprint now. So as you can see, this operates incredibly fast. The speed of that sensor would actually end up being a complaint. So basically, it authenticated so quickly that if you had notifications on your lock screen, you were not able to read them in time. Apple ended up addressing that in software with iOS 10. So that version brought the raise to wake feature as well as press home to unlock. So both of those kind of gave you more of an opportunity to check your notifications before the Touch ID would authenticate. The 6S models alongside the SE were the last iPhones to feature a 3.5mm headphone jack, as the iPhone 7 and all future iPhones removed that. The 6S models were officially discontinued in September of 2018, but there were definitely some of these floating around after that date with prepaid carriers. And now let's turn our attention to iOS 9 on this device specifically. One of the most notable changes for this version was a new system-wide font. So that would be Apple's in-house design font called San Francisco. With the previous version iOS 8 and older, they were using variants of the Helvetica New font. So here's a comparison between those. The San Francisco font was a little bit more rounded than Helvetica New, so you'll kind of notice just some more sharp edges to that older font. The News application here was new for iOS 9. Also, this is a random point, but the keys for the iOS 9 keyboard were now case sensitive, so appearing in capitals only when you were typing in them. With iOS 8, the keys were just always in capital letters. And there was a new look for multitasking with iOS 9, so the app cards now went to the left. There was also a new look for Siri with iOS 9. What's the weather like in New York City?
It's currently partly cloudy and 64 degrees in New York.
So with iOS 9, there was kind of an interesting look with flowing colors for Siri, whereas on iOS 8, it was more of a simple blur across the whole screen. And now we'll check out the rest of the wallpapers here for iOS 9. So the 9.0 versions here featured some unique wallpaper choices. Starting here with the default image, this was slightly changed with iOS 9.1. As you can see here with my iPhone 6s running iOS 9.3.1, the image is the same, it's just kind of cropped differently. So on the 9.0 version, you see a little bit more to the left that has a darker blue look. I'm not exactly sure what this image is, but I've always thought it kind of resembles like a sand or water look. This second image choice here was the same, although it does appear to have a ever so slightly different crop. But the third image is completely different. So on the 9.0 versions, it's kind of a brown sand look, while on the 9.1 and newer, it's a blue sand. These next two rows here are the same, but the fourth row is different. So it's like a different angle between these two planets. Here's that second one, and here is the third. I've always thought the different wallpapers for the early versions of iOS 9 was a really strange quirk. But yeah, leave it to Apple to make these images here kind of feel rare and unique. Lastly here, we did get the dynamic category. These were carried over from iOS 7. So that pretty much concludes my look at this brand new iPhone 6s that was announced 10 years ago today. It's been so cool to check this one out. It's like a time capsule from 2015. The whole activation error thing was a bummer, but at least I was able to bypass it pretty easily. I really think this was a standout iPhone in Apple's history, up there with the iPhone 10. But leave me a comment below with your thoughts on the 6s. I thought this would be really cool to take a look at today just before the iPhone 17 announcement. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.